stories.
Story 1. Rain lashed the ragged hills of Greystone Valley, turning soil to sludge and choking the air with mist. Beneath broken tarps and humming floodlights, the excavation site looked more like a battlefield than a scientific dig. Trenches, bled with muddy water. Metal poles flickered with voltage in the storm. And yet, Lucian Drake smiled. Dressed in a black overcoat and fedora, untouched by mud, Lucian stepped carefully along the wooden planks placed to keep boots dry. His assistant stumbled behind, shielding an old map from the wind. "Is this it?" Lucian asked, kneeling at the edge of the dig. The crew had uncovered a stone chest, unlike anything the team had found in months. The top was smooth obsidian, etched with symbols that writhed in the torchlight, but no one wanted to touch it. The air around it was too still, too thick, like the world was holding its breath. Julian Cortez, the site's lead archaeologist, looked nervous. "Sir, I believe this artifact is cursed." Lucian chuckled. "All power is cursed, Julian. Open it." Julian hesitated. The moment the lid cracked open, three things happened. The wind died, every animal noise ceased, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Something hissed inside, not air, but a low, wet exhale. Inside the stone chest was a mask. Black, bone-shaped, sculpted, like a human skull but elongated, grotesque, as if designed by something that had never seen a face. It gleamed with oil and blood. "Is that," Julian whispered, "is that breathing?" The laborer nearest the box, Paolo, reached in and recoiled. "It's warm." Lucian stepped closer. As his shadow fell over the mask, the storm above seemed to pause. The Greystone Historical Museum never closed early. Until now. Dr. Marcus Thorne, curator and pre-Columbian scholar, stood in the middle of the locked-down exhibit hall, staring at the thing they had delivered. The mask was now under. Bulletproof glass in a high-security vault. It didn't matter. Marcus couldn't sleep. Not while it was here. Since its arrival, lights flickered without cause. Electronic systems shorted. At 3:33 a.m. every night, the building's temperature dropped to freezing. Janitors reported whispers, in dead languages. Security guards quit. One woman had a seizure in front of the display. Marcus tried to tell himself it was superstition, mass suggestion, urban hysteria. But the dreams. He had seen blood on temple floors. Screaming mouths sewn. Shut. A throne made of bones. A god with no skin. Only muscle and fire. Reaching toward him through the veil of time. Isaiah Vance was nobody. A street sleeper. A mumbling mess. Forgotten by the city. But ever since the mask had arrived, his dreams became visions. He saw shrines of red stone and bodies wrapped in thorns. He saw eyes that never blinked, and a voice, soft and constant, whispering from beneath the earth. "Come to me." He obeyed. That night, Isaiah slipped into the museum through a delivery hatch. No one saw him. Cameras blinked out at 3:32 a.m. He wandered the halls, barefoot, until he found the vault. The door was open. The glass was gone. The mask waited. Isaiah stared. His body shook. And then, he placed the mask on his face. The transformation was not instant. It was agony. Isaiah's bones cracked backward. His skin tore at the edges. His eyes turned black, then bled. Screaming echoed through the halls as the mask fused to his skull, melting flesh into porcelain, burning tendons into shape. When he rose, his body was taller, broader, inhuman. Blades jutted from his arms. His mouth no longer existed, only a curve of jagged bone where lips had been. He walked through the museum calmly and began to kill. Officer Jensen, the night guard, died first, throat crushed by one hand. Then came the two interns, found impaled on ancient spears. The final victim, a janitor, was discovered with her ribcage spread open like wings, her heart missing, her mouth stuffed with old coins. Blood stained the marble floors. Security footage? Gone. Witnesses? None. But on the walls, painted in dark, glistening strokes, was a symbol, a circle with 3 slashes through it. The ancient mark of Ancaris, the blood god. Riley Cross lit a cigarette as she stood in the museum's main hall. The blood hadn't dried yet. 3 bodies in one building. Ritualistic, surgical, precise, and no one saw a thing. She'd been a cop for 20 years, seen mutilations, mass shootings, occult copycats, but this felt older. The kind of wrong that lived in your bones. Riley met with Marcus the next morning. He was shaking. "I saw it happen," he said, showing her sketches and transcripts. The mask. It chose him. Riley thought he was insane, until she looked into the vault herself, and the mask, which should have been in evidence, was back on display. The skull executioner no longer needed to hide. He stalked the shadows of Greystone, feeding on the hearts of the chosen. He carved his shrine in an abandoned subway station, hearts placed in perfect circles, blood used like ink, bones stacked like altars. In the center stood a crude effigy of a god rising from fire, stitched together with sinew and hair. Each victim was part of a ritual. Each heart fed a hunger, the hunger of Ancaris, who waited behind the veil. The air in the city began to sour. Insects died, dogs went missing, and every child under 10 drew the same image in school. A man with a skull face and 10 bleeding arms. Riley's dreams turned to nightmares. She saw herself flayed, kneeling before the executioner, her own heart beating in his hands. The voice began to whisper to her too. Marcus discovered a final line in an ancient scroll. "When the 6th heart is taken, the god shall see again." 6 hearts. Riley counted the bodies. 5. A man was found the next morning. His heart gone, his body staged in the shape of a triangle with his eyes carved open. 6. Marcus met Riley outside the museum steps. "It's begun," he whispered. "The gate is open." Far below, in his blood-soaked shrine, the skull executioner turned his face to the stone ceiling and let out a sound that no throat should ever make. A sound that shook the city. That night, the lights in Greystone flickered, and the god beneath, the mask began to stir. The morning after the 6th heart was taken, the city of Greystone awoke in silence. No birds, no traffic, not even the usual construction noise from the city's south side. The air hung thick, like soup gone sour. On every window pane, condensation spelled symbols that hadn't been written by human hands. People tried to go about their day, but something crawled behind their eyes. Children cried for no reason. Dogs barked at corners. And across the city, 6 families held funerals, none of them open casket. The skull executioner was no longer a myth. He was a shadow stretching across rooftops, a whisper that left blood behind, and now he was building something. Far below the old city, in the collapsed ruins of the Silver Spine subway station, the executioner moved like a machine. Heartless bodies hung from meat hooks. Bones were carved into flutes and whistles, tied together, with sinew, forming what could only be described as ritual instruments. The chamber was no longer just a shrine. It was becoming a womb, one that would soon birth something holy and dead. Symbols glowed along the walls, not painted, but burned directly into the concrete. The executioner did not sleep. He worked, always, collecting, preparing. The time of Ancaris was near. In his office above the museum, Dr. Marcus Thorne hadn't slept in days. He flipped between scrolls and forensic reports, between language references and news clippings. He had found a scroll, one of the oldest in his collection, that described a ritual mask made of bone and soul, used by a cult called the Hollow Court. Their purpose: to harvest blood for a god banished beneath the world. The same god whose name was now showing up in every crime scene, Ancaris. When the sixth heart is taken, the veil will wear thin, and the god shall look through flesh. Once more, he called Detective Riley Cross immediately. Riley arrived with coffee and 2 fresh crime scene photos. One victim had glyphs carved into his spine. The other had both eyes and tongue removed. "This thing," she said, lighting a cigarette, "doesn't just kill, it thinks." Marcus agreed, and it was getting closer. Deep inside the executioner's shell, Isaiah Vance was not fully gone. He floated in darkness, trapped inside a skull made of screams. He saw the things the mask showed him: memories of sacrifices on jungle altars, of volcanoes weeping blood, of priests tearing open the innocent to feed something that wasn't ever alive. And now he saw a city, modern and indifferent, being prepared like a lamb. Isaiah tried to scream. No one heard. In a lavish underground study lined with gold, Lucian Drake poured blood from a silver goblet into a glass basin carved with animal skulls. His face was lit by candlelight, and the glow of an ancient book opened on his lap. He had everything: wealth, power, control. But the mask was never meant to be caged in a museum. It was meant to transform the world. Lucian wasn't afraid of Ancaris. He wanted audience with him, and so he recited the chant, the same chant once used in the temples of the Hollow Court. From ashen vein, return again. By blood and scream, awaken dream. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the city, a baby was stillborn. The skull executioner returned that night. He moved through alleys and rooftops, silent and swift, cutting through the city like a hot needle, through flesh. His victims weren't random anymore. They were all tied to old bloodlines, descendants of people who once helped seal Ancaris away. The executioner was erasing history, one by one: a retired priest, a blind woman who kept ancient texts hidden in her basement, a homeless man with a carved wooden amulet passed down from his grandfather. Riley found the connection, but she found it too late. Using scrolls and blood patterns, Marcus identified the next phase of the god's return. The killings weren't just sacrifices, they were coordinates. Each heart was a point on a circle. When 9 are taken, and the blood star drawn, the veil will split, and Ancaris shall walk. They had 6. 3 remained. Marcus traced the blood points on a map and froze. The final heart, the one at the center of the star, matched a hospital. The same hospital where Riley Cross was born. Riley didn't believe in fate, but she couldn't ignore the dreams anymore. Dreams of burning temples and red-eyed men chanting her name. She remembered her grandmother muttering strange prayers, remembered being told never to enter the attic where a strange box was hidden. That box contained journals, names, symbols, blood-stained pages. Her family was once part of the Hollow Court, not servants of the god, jailers. That's why the executioner's killings were circling her. She wasn't just a cop, she was the key. The executioner knew she knew. He came for her. Riley and Marcus fled through storm drains beneath the museum, carrying the scrolls needed to complete a counter-ritual. The water was high. The lights were flickering, and behind them, the executioner chased. The sound of metal scraping stone, breathless and relentless. They barely made it to an emergency exit before he reached them. Marcus was slashed across the ribs. Riley dragged him out, but she dropped the dagger, the one weapon that might have pierced the mask. That night, Lucian Drake stood on a rooftop, arms open to the sky, chanting as blood rained down from the heavens. Not metaphorically, but real blood, falling in warm drops across the city. People screamed and ran. Radios exploded. Cars stalled. In the shrine below Greystone, the executioner stood among 9 bodies. 9 hearts burned in a basin of stone. The ground shook. The walls wept, and from the blood rose a shape. Ancaris, still formless but watching through the mask. It spoke one word, and every mirror in the city shattered. More. The gate was open now. Lucian's body began to change. Marcus slipped into unconsciousness from blood loss. And Riley? She stood on the roof of the museum, staring into a storm shaped like a screaming face. She was ready to fight. But the city would never be the same again, not with the blood god awake. The rain didn't stop. It was no longer natural. It had thickened, clotted. Streets ran dark and sticky as though the sky bled with every heartbeat of the god awakening below. Citizens locked their doors, but it did not matter. Windows trembled, light bulbs burst, and in every mirror, if you looked long enough, your reflection turned away first. Greystone was no longer just a city. It was an altar. The skull executioner wandered the sewer shrine in silence. The ritual was complete, but Ancaris was still only half-born, an eye behind the veil, peering through blood, and he was impatient. The executioner dragged bodies back into the depths. He needed new sacrifices, more hearts, more pain. The shrine had begun to pulsate, walls warping and veining like living flesh. Even rats wouldn't go near the tunnels anymore, but one rat had no choice. Dr. Marcus Thorne awoke in a hospital bed, surrounded by police tape and a priest whispering in Latin. His wounds were bound with gauze soaked in herbs and charcoal. He'd been saved, but he wasn't the same. Every time he blinked, he saw symbols forming on the walls, burning, shifting. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, as though they remembered something his mind had tried to forget. He asked the nurse where he was. She didn't answer. She was dead. Her throat had been slit hours ago. The executioner had walked the halls and left him alive. Detective Riley Cross stood in the attic of her childhood home, holding the blood-soaked journal of her grandmother. The truth was undeniable. She was the last in her bloodline. A warden. Someone who, generations ago, had sworn to keep the mask buried forever. She had failed, but she wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to pray. She was going to hunt. Riley gathered what she could. Salt rounds, old ritual knives, a flare gun, and tucked into the lining of a false wall, she found the thing she had forgotten existed. A bone blade dagger, shaped like a fang. Her grandmother called it the only wound the god can remember. Across Greystone, killings resumed. Faster, messier, public, a grocery store, a daycare, a church mid-sermon. The executioner tore through the buildings with a singular purpose: to erase sanctity, to poison anything still clean. Every victim's heart was removed. But now the bodies were speaking, some twitching after death, mouths moving without lungs, whispering in the tongue of the hollow court. One detective went mad after hearing it, tore out his ears and jumped from the precinct rooftop. Riley couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of Ancaris. Or worse, her own face on his body. Her bloodline wasn't just chosen, it was linked. She began hearing whispers, seeing things move in reflections. Once, she found herself standing on the museum roof at dawn, barefoot and holding the bone dagger, unsure how she got there. The city was inside her now, and it wanted her to open the last gate. In his private chamber beneath City Hall, Lucian Drake stood in front of a mirror, watching his skin ripple. His chest bore a glyph, a brand of submission. Ancaris had marked him, but Lucian didn't fear it. He welcomed it. He opened his mouth and pulled out a tooth, a ritual offering. Blood ran down his chin. Behind him, shadows clapped. Lucian no longer needed worshippers. He was becoming high priest of the rebirth. The executioner's most brazen attack happened at 3 UAM. A firehouse in central Greystone received a call. Smoke from an underground chamber. They responded. Only one firefighter came back. Burned, hysterical, eyes gouged, teeth broken from biting his own tongue. He whispered one word before dying. Throne. Investigators found no survivors. Only a spiral of scorched bodies, with the executioner's sigil burned into the engine bay. The media didn't cover it, because every reporter sent to the scene died within 24 hours. Marcus escaped the hospital and tracked Riley to her grandmother's house. He looked like a ghost, pale, eyes sunken, voice dry. "I decoded the final verse," he said, gripping her arm. "It's not just a return. It's a replacing." Riley stared at him. Replacing what? Reality. The god doesn't just want to walk among men. He wants to overwrite the world. Every river will run with heart blood. Every eye will see only red. Every mind will forget mercy. The ritual isn't about resurrection. It's about deletion. Riley and Marcus descended into the tunnels with one goal: destroy the shrine and kill the Skull Executioner before the veil tears completely. They came, armed with symbols, knives, and the bone dagger. But they were not prepared. The shrine was alive now. The walls heaved like lungs, and veins pumped blood across the ceiling. Faces grew from the walls, screaming and grinning. The executioner was waiting, standing still among a pile of fresh corpses. Riley attacked first. The fight was brutal. Metal on bone, fists on flesh, screams and sparks and blood. The executioner couldn't speak, but his eyes burned with recognition. He knew her. She was the last jailer, and he would feed her to the god himself. In a final desperate move, Riley feigned death. When the executioner knelt to carve her heart, she rammed the bone dagger into his ribs. He let out a sound like thunder cracking inside flesh. His body convulsed, his mask cracked down the center. Isaiah's face flashed for a second, wide-eyed, terrified, then vanished. The executioner didn't die, but he stopped. He fled, bleeding, wounded, unstable, and the shrine collapsed around them. Marcus and Riley escaped through the storm drain as the shrine burned. They thought they'd won something. But above them, Lucian Drake stood on the museum steps, chanting in the old tongue. Behind him, a second mask, untouched until now, opened its eyes. The executioner was only the first disciple, and Ancaris had more mouths to feed. The city of Greystone had turned gray in truth. Skies hung like corpses. The rain smelled of ash. And beneath the streets, the world shifted, as though some massive beast stirred just below the surface. No one slept. Those who tried dreamed of teeth in the ceiling, or masks growing from their skin. Hospitals filled with catatonic patients who whispered about a second sun, one made of bone and flame, rising from the east. And in the center of it all was Detective Riley Cross, bleeding, hunted, and haunted. She had stabbed the executioner, but she had not killed him. Dr. Marcus Thorne sat beneath a streetlight outside the smoldering wreckage of Greystone's main library. The fire hadn't been accidental. Something, or someone, had burned every occult book, scroll, and reference in the city's collection. But Marcus had saved one. It was brittle, molded, marked in places with what looked like skin oil and rust, but was probably blood. He translated by hand, and when he read the final passage, his pen trembled. The final seal is blood of the jailer, spilled in love and in fear. Only then may the god pass through skin and rule unseen. He dropped the scroll. Riley wasn't just a key, she was the gateway. Riley sat in her grandmother's attic, trembling. At first it was small things, her veins darkening under the skin, her eyes changing slightly in the mirror, red-rimmed, pupils narrowing. But then the dreams grew vivid. She dreamed of herself standing naked before a throne of fire. Her voice was not her own. And when she screamed, the walls cracked, a mirror shattered without being touched. Something was awakening inside her. And Karis no longer needed the executioner to find the final seal. He was growing it. Lucian Drake paced, the catacombs beneath his estate, now transformed into a temple of ruin. At the far wall, a second skull mask floated above an altar, untouched by time, but now pulsing with hunger. It called to him, spoke to him in a voice that vibrated in his blood. He kneeled and offered his body. The mask sank into his face like water swallowing a corpse. Lucian screamed and was remade. The original executioner, once Isaiah Vance, hid in the dark, broken, and wounded by Riley's dagger. But he was not alone. A second executioner now walked the earth. Lucian, taller, cleaner, more regal. Where Isaiah had been hunger and rage, Lucian was order and intellect, a priest in skin and metal. Lucian approached Isaiah and placed a hand on his shoulder. Their masks clicked in unison. Two servants now stood beneath the god, two blades. One, goal. Marcus burst into Riley's home, drenched, eyes wild. "You have to leave," he said. "It's in your blood. You're not being hunted anymore. You're being shaped." Riley shook her head. It's already started. Her skin was hot. Symbols had appeared on her back. Not tattoos, but burns forming on their own. The bloodline, curse had always been about containment. Her ancestors weren't just protectors. They were vessels. Insurance. If the gate ever weakened, their flesh would rebuild it. But Riley? She was the last. If she died, the gate would collapse. At sunset, both executioners walked openly. They didn't hide anymore. They entered a police station and butchered everyone inside. They walked through a hospital and turned patients into choristers, mouths forced open, throats singing in dead tongues. They turned churches into slaughterhouses, and they left only one message scrawled in every place: "The gate will bleed." Riley held the bone dagger in one hand and a gun in the other. She could feel the curse spreading. Her heart pounded too loud. Her blood ran too hot. She knew what Marcus wanted to ask her. He didn't need to say it. She had to die, and it had to be by her own hand willingly. Only then could the god be sealed again. But she couldn't do it. Not yet. Not until she tried one last thing. Riley and Marcus broke into the ruins of Greystone's oldest cathedral, armed with chalk, candles, and blood-soaked scrolls. They began the counter-ritual. It required Riley to speak in the old language, one that tore at her throat like glass. She bled from her nose. Her eyes rolled back, and as they neared completion, the ceiling collapsed. Lucien and Isaiah descended, masks glowing. The ritual was interrupted. Marcus screamed as Isaiah ran a blade through his leg. Riley grabbed the dagger, but Lucien spoke a single word, and her body froze, not from fear, from obedience. Lucien whispered to her, "You're not meant to die. You're meant to deliver." He explained the truth. Riley was never the key. She was the door, and now she was open. Her skin split along her spine. Light poured from her ribs. Her eyes went black. Ancharis reached through her, not as a god of form, but of thought, of infection, of belief. The world began to warp. The laws of death started to fold. Riley screamed and collapsed. Lucien smiled. Isaiah knelt. The shrine above the city lit with fire, and somewhere, every child under 10 cried in unison. Marcus crawled from the wreckage, broken and sobbing. Riley was gone, taken. The executioners stood atop the cathedral, silhouettes against an unnatural moon. Ancharis was coming, not in a body, but through every mind that feared him. Greystone no longer looked like a city. The skyline was there, intact, but the shadows were wrong. Streets twisted where they shouldn't. Buildings leaned as though whispering to each other. Glass windows reflected places that didn't exist, and above it all, the moon pulsed like a rotten fruit, too large, too close, weeping soft red light. The air tasted of salt and bone. Something was walking between the seconds of time, and no one remembered what the world was supposed to feel like anymore. Dr. Marcus Thorne woke to silence, not peace, just the absence of everything. He lay at the edge of the ruined cathedral, his legs shredded, his mind splintered. Around him were the remains of the failed counter-ritual, torn pages, shattered candles, and the burned imprint of Riley's body scorched into the floor like a shadow turned to ash. She was gone, taken, or worse, remade. In the deepest corner of Lucien Drake's subterranean temple, a third mask had begun to hum. This one was older than the others, smoother, quieter. It did not scream. It did not tear. It whispered. Lucien stood naked before it, flesh marked with glyphs carved by his own hands. His transformation was nearly complete. The other executioners flanked him, Isaiah, limping and glitching like a broken marionette, and a new figure dressed in surgeon's robes, whose face was covered in gauze and teeth. 3 masks, 3 bodies. One purpose. At the heart of Greystone, once the civic center, now a crater of pulsing stone, Lucien began the final phase. Basin of 9 skulls was arranged into a star, the basin filled with blood, not from a person, but from the earth itself. Black-red liquid boiled up from cracks in the ground. Lucien raised his arms, and the city began to chant. Not people. The buildings. The wind. The sky. All repeating a single phrase, spoken in no known language but understood in every soul. The blood. Sun rises. And in the sky, a second sun did rise. Smaller, red, flickering like flame behind flesh. The birth of Ancharis had begun. There was no more body, only thought, only memory, only light and pain. Riley drifted through a black sea. Her body was distant, coiled like a burned photograph. Her voice was silent. Her thoughts were not hers, and at the center of it all, a throne made of veins, beating, watching her. Ancaris spoke not with words but with truths she had never wanted to know. You were never free. You were made of cage. I was always inside you. Now you will carry me into every waking mind. And she wept, though she had no face left to cry with. Marcus limped through the ruined streets, half dreaming. His skin had started to bleed scripture. His tongue twitched with glyphs. He knew time was ending, but he also remembered one last scroll, burned into his memory. The god may walk when no will stands against him, but one who dies in truth, with love, may shatter his mouth. It wasn't about fighting. It was about sacrifice. Someone had to love Riley. Someone had to see her as more than a vessel and die for her without fear. Only then would Ancaris choke. Marcus had nothing left. So he made his way toward the crater. Lucian stood atop the blood altar, glowing with divine flame. The executioners flanked him like statues. Riley's body floated above the basin, a cocoon of flesh and light, her hair fused with bone. Thousands of people surrounded them. Not cultists, not worshippers, but hollowed-out humans, empty-eyed, humming softly. The world was ready. But Marcus arrived. He climbed the altar, limping, barefoot, bleeding. Lucien laughed. You're too late. Marcus smiled. Good. That means I have nothing left to lose. And then, without warning, he plunged a blade into his own heart. Marcus fell beside Riley. Blood poured from his chest, but not just blood. Memory. He whispered to her through the veil. Not with mouth, but with soul. You're not a god. You're not a curse. You're my friend. My hero. My heart. And something cracked. Riley's eyes opened. Real eyes. Human ones, and she screamed. Not in pain, in fury. The cocoon shattered. The crater shook. Lucian stepped back. The second sun flickered, and Ancaris reeled, for the first time, in confusion. The executioners turned on each other. Isaiah attacked Lucien. The third mask shattered into dust. The sky collapsed in on itself, peeling back like paper to reveal black fire and teeth the size of buildings. But Riley didn't run. She picked up Marcus's fallen bone dagger. She turned toward the altar, and with all her strength, she stabbed the air. Not a person, not a thing, but the space Ancaris had taken in the world. Reality tore. Ancaris screamed, a sound made of dead languages, broken music, and unmade memories. The crater imploded. When the light returned, Greystone was a ruin. The blood sun was gone. The masks were cracked. And Riley? She stood alone at the city's edge, scarred, burned, but alive. She whispered Marcus's name into the wind, and from the rubble, a single eye blinked. The god was wounded. But he was not dead, not yet. Greystone no longer appeared on maps. The crater where the city once stood now steamed under a sunless sky. Birds avoided it. Planes veered off course. Satellites blinked out when they passed overhead. The world had not forgotten it. It had simply rejected it. Some said the city had burned. Others said it had drowned. A few whispered the truth, that Greystone had been devoured from within, not by bombs or disease, but by a name, and that name still echoed in the hearts of those who survived. Ancaris. Riley Cross stood at the edge of the crater, wind blowing through the burned shreds of her coat. She had not spoken since the collapse. Her eyes no longer blinked. She didn't sleep. She simply stood, watching, listening, waiting. Inside her, the curse still curled, dormant, but not dead. She had sealed Ancaris, yes, but not destroyed him. A god cannot be killed by mortal hands, only forgotten. And Ancaris had made sure that would never happen. In the hollow basements of nearby towns, people gathered again, wearing scraps of bone, reciting phrases not in books. They had seen what happened to Greystone, and they wanted it to happen again. The Hollow Court was no longer ancient myth. It had become movement, message, infection. One mask had been broken, but others remained, scattered, buried, waiting. Beneath the rubble, Marcus Thorne did not rot. His body had died, yes, pierced by his own blade, but his soul remained bound to the bone dagger, and that dagger now whispered to Riley. She carried it with her everywhere. Sometimes she swore she could feel his hand in hers. Sometimes she dreamed in his voice. And sometimes, when the sky darkened suddenly at noon, she heard him scream from within the blade, "Seal it! Seal it now!" Though banished from the physical world, Ancaris had changed shape. He now lived in fear itself. Every time a child dreamt of teeth behind the closet door, every time someone paused at the edge of a rooftop and felt a whisper urge them forward, every time a mirror fogged with no breath, that was Ancaris, knocking, not with claws, but with remembrance. Riley returned to what remained of the Greystone Historical Museum. Only the basement had survived, cracked, burned, but intact. There she found the final scroll, one her grandmother had hidden inside a lead-lined tomb. It told of the seventh seal, the final barrier that, if broken, would allow Ancaris to possess every mind at once, no longer needing vessels, and that seal was her name. If the world remembered Riley Cross, her story, her sacrifice, her curse, the gate would remain ajar. But if she erased herself, he would fade. Riley took the dagger. She stood before the broken vault. She wrote the last glyph on her own skin. Then with her own hand, she cut her name away. Syllable by syllable, from her thoughts, her blood, her memory, and in doing so, she vanished. Not in death, but in absence. No one would remember her. Not Marcus, not Greystone, not even the Hollow Court. Riley Cross never existed. And so, Ancaris screamed. A scream so loud it cracked heaven. But no one heard, because no one remembered who he was screaming for. The masks turned to dust. The sigils faded. The blood in the earth dried to ash. And in the windless quiet that followed, the world breathed again. A small child in a distant town found a strange object buried beneath an old church foundation. A piece of black stone, smooth and warm to the touch. He showed it to his mother. She took it, smiled, and frowned. "What is it?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "But when I hold it..." He looked up. "I remember someone who isn't real." And in the distance, a whisper rose, soft and small. "The flesh remembers the blade." Story 2. The road leading to the cottage was long, white, and forgotten. Snow clung to the trees like ash on bone. As Elena Blake's rusting black car groaned up the final slope, the world behind her seemed to vanish into a wall of mist and frost. The GPS had cut out an hour ago. She hadn't passed another car since noon. Good. That was the point. The cottage stood alone at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a frozen Atlantic Sea that looked more like obsidian than water. Its shutters were dark. The chimney, dead. A for rent sign still hung crookedly by the porch, now buried halfway in snow. She parked beside a crooked oak tree, whose branches looked like twisted fingers, grabbed her guitar case, laptop bag, and duffel, and stepped into silence. There was no reception, no signal, no welcome, only wind. Inside, the cottage smelled of damp cedar, old smoke, and something else. Something metallic. It had been untouched since autumn. Dust lay thick on the kitchen counter. Her boots squeaked across the wood. The living room had an old record player and a bare bulb lamp. A single rocking chair faced the bay window. She closed the curtains. She would write here. Or try. No distractions. No ex-girlfriends. No agents. No cities. Just the ocean, the wind, and the songs inside her. But the silence felt too perfect. Like the house was listening. Elena spent the first 2 days recording ambient tracks. Wind across the bay, the creak of the floorboards, the sound of her breath inside the cottage. She layered them into her DAW. Late at night, she played the rough tracks back, headphones on, head bowed. That was when she first noticed it. A sound, barely audible, beneath the wind track. Like a whisper. A syllable. Then another. She removed the headphones. Silence. She replayed the track. There it was again, a whisper beneath her own breath. Don't forget me. She deleted the file, restarted her session, told herself it was residual audio from a previous project. But the words returned, even on new tracks, each time. Different phrases, each one sounding more like her own voice. She met Sophie Vale by accident on day 4. Elena had wandered into the village's only cafe, a place that smelled like burnt milk and fried dough, and asked about local places for winter photography. The owner pointed at a woman sitting in the far corner with a Nikon, gloves, and ink-black bangs. Sophie looked up. "I've seen you," she said. Elena blinked. "Sorry?" Sophie smiled, but didn't explain. They talked. Sophie lived alone on the other side of the cliffs. Did landscape photography and portraits. Had once worked in Toronto, but left after everything got loud. Her eyes didn't blink often. She offered to shoot Elena for free. For fun. A barter for music, she said. Their first photo session happened at dusk, in the snow-dusted forest near the cottage. Sophie captured Elena holding her guitar beneath a canopy of frozen branches. Elena looked back at one shot on Sophie's camera. Her face was blurred. Not motion blur. Just wrong. Like her face had melted inward, eyes too far apart, mouth stretched unnaturally wide. Sophie laughed it off. Corrupted file. Cold does weird things. But the camera hadn't glitched. The snow hadn't moved. And in the photo's background, between the trees, something stood tall and black, as though, watching them, Elena became obsessed with the house's sounds. She started leaving the recorder on overnight, just to collect room tone, she told herself. One morning, she woke to find all the recordings titled automatically. Elena, 1:42 a.m. Elena, 3:09 a.m. Elena, 4:44 a.m. Inside them, she heard her own voice, speaking, whispering, crying. But she hadn't gotten out of bed, and the voice didn't match any memory. On one file, she said, "He's waiting inside the wall." She pressed pause. Her hand shook. The wall beside her desk, it sounded hollow when tapped. The librarian in the village, Mrs. Alder, a hunched woman with cataract eyes, recognized the cottage's address when Elena asked about maps of the land. "That place?" she whispered. "It doesn't want company." Elena asked what she meant. Mrs. Alder hesitated. People used to say it was one of the Watcher's houses. Elena waited. The Watcher is a story, an old one. They say if you run away from the world too hard, run into silence too deep, you call him. Not because you want to, because you're the perfect shape for him to fill. Is that some kind of ghost? No, the woman said softly. A ghost was once human. The Watcher never was. Elena stopped sleeping. The whispering returned in the daytime now. Sometimes, she'd find her laptop open, files rearranged, her DAW screen flashing a waveform she hadn't recorded. Playing music. That sounded like screaming run-through reverb. Sophie visited again, noticed the deep red marks on Elena's arms. Did you fall? Elena didn't answer. She hadn't fallen. The marks looked like hands. That night, the rocking chair in the living room began to move. No wind, no draft. It moved exactly 13 times, then stopped. On the 7th day, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot, skin pale, but the reflection was smiling. She wasn't. She turned the light off, then on again. Her reflection was now crying. She ran. The final pages of her notebook were filled with fragmented phrases. He's behind the sound. The silence is not empty. She knew and didn't tell me. He uses my voice. The song will never end. She sent one final text to Sophie. Don't come here again. He wants your face too. Then she unplugged everything. Power, internet, phone line. But even in the dark, the voice returned. From inside the guitar, from beneath the floor, from her own mouth. Snow fell again the next morning, thick and soundless. Elena hadn't slept. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her lips had begun to crack from the cold air she no longer felt. She didn't remember drinking the tea beside her, but the cup was warm. Her laptop, left closed the night before, was now open. The music software displayed a session titled Listen Until It Ends.wave. She didn't remember naming it. She didn't remember recording it. The waveform stretched across the screen in jagged, unnatural spikes, like the pulse of something alive and angry. Against every instinct, she hit play. The audio was layered with white noise, echoing thuds, and whispers. Words that sounded almost like hers, but twisted, deeper, drawn out like the voice was wearing her mouth. Then, beneath the noise, came a strange clicking. Rhythmic, predictable, not random. She zoomed in on the waveform. The clicks had spaces, patterns. They were code. Sophie arrived just past noon, knocking at the door with a 6-pack of cider and her camera in hand. Elena didn't answer at first. She stood inside the hallway, frozen, watching the door handle twitch slightly before Sophie's voice called, "It's me." Letting her in was a mistake. But Elena was tired of silence. Sophie looked around, visibly uncomfortable. "Your power's off?" Elena nodded. "I like the dark now." They sat by candlelight. Sophie showed her the photos from their last shoot. At least, she tried to. Her memory cards had all corrupted. Every image showed static, blurred white bars. On one of them, between glitched pixels, a shadowed shape towered behind Elena. It had no face, just lines running vertically down what should have been a head, like scars or strings. Sophie deleted the files, disturbed. But Elena leaned forward. "I've seen him," she whispered. "In the mirror. In my dreams. He's inside the static now." That night, Sophie offered to stay. She regretted it. At 3:12 a.m., she woke up to the sound of plucking strings, long, slow, deep, like a cello being played in reverse. She followed the sound to the hallway. The lights buzzed. The walls moved, very subtly, as if breathing. From one spot near the closet, she heard whispering, "She brought you here. She shouldn't have." When she touched the wall, her hand came back wet. Blood. Or oil. She couldn't tell in the dark. Back in the guest room, Elena was already awake, sitting on the floor with headphones in, eyes closed. Her head tilted side to side in time with something Sophie couldn't hear. "Who are you listening to?" Sophie asked. Elena smiled. "The Man in the Static." The next morning, Sophie drove into town to clear her head. At the general store, she ran into a man named David Mears, a former local DJ and now caretaker of the island's abandoned radio tower. When she mentioned the strange recordings, David turned pale. He invited her back to the tower. There, among old tapes and reels, he showed her a clip, an audio log from 1984. A woman named Marjorie Hall had gone missing for weeks after isolating herself to write an opera. Her voice was never the same again. He played the recovered audio. In the recording, Marjorie sings, but behind her voice is something else. A male voice, inhuman, layering itself into her melody without being recorded. It ends with Marjorie screaming. David looked at Sophie. "She stayed in your friend's cottage." Back at the cottage, Elena locked herself in the bathroom. She pulled off her shirt. Her skin had become almost translucent. Veins darkened beneath her arms and shoulders, but some were not veins. They were strings, thin, blackened threads that pulsed when touched. She took a knife to them, but they bled sound, not blood. When she cut one, the entire house made a low, vibrating chord, a sound so deep it shook the floorboards. Sophie returned just after sundown. Elena was in the corner of the kitchen, crying with her face buried in her hands. "I can't turn him off," she said. Sophie held her. Then she looked up. The rocking chair in the living room was moving again, rocking back and forth, and this time, something sat in it. A long silhouette. Silent. Waiting. Sophie begged her to leave. They packed their things in silence. Elena went upstairs to get her notebook. She didn't come back. When Sophie called her name, no one answered. She found her in the studio, frozen, headphones on, eyes wide, staring at nothing. The same track had been looping for an hour. Sophie ripped the headphones off. Elena turned to her, whispering, "He lives in what we leave behind." Then she collapsed. Sophie took her to the hospital in town. Elena had no pulse. But the monitors glitched when near her body. They played radio signals, fragmented whispers, even parts of her music. Doctors couldn't explain it. Sophie sat by her side for hours, listening to the monitor mimic human voices. Eventually, one voice came through. "Clear, bring me home." Sophie's nose bled. When she looked back at Elena, her eyes were open again, but not looking at Sophie. They looked through her. The power in the hospital flickered. The monitors screamed static. And in the hallway mirror, Sophie saw Elena standing. But the real Elena was still beside her. Sophie ran. But every hallway showed her own reflection, bending, distorting, unraveling like a tape being pulled apart. She burst into the snow, got into her car, drove back toward the mainland. But as she crossed the bridge, she looked into the rearview mirror and saw herself smiling. Except, she wasn't. The reflection moved on its own. After fleeing the island, Sophie rented a short-term apartment in the city, a modern studio on the 3rd floor. White walls, Pale floors, no creaking pipes, no drafty windows. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her phone stayed off. She didn't respond to texts from her photography circle or family. She took no new jobs. She didn't go outside unless necessary. And even then, she avoided mirrors and storefront reflections. Inside her new apartment, her mind continued to echo. Sometimes, she would play old voicemail recordings of Elena. Her laughter, her humming, the way she used to talk about how silence was never empty. Sophie had deleted the strange photographs. Yes, but she hadn't deleted the last audio file Elena sent her. Listen until I tens. Wave. She hadn't dared play it again until that night. Rain tapped on the glass like tiny bones. The city beyond, the window blurred in neon and fog. At 1:14 a.m., Sophie opened the file. It began softly. A hollow wind, whispers layered underneath, Elena's voice chanting almost. But then came a new layer. Not her voice, not anyone's voice. Something inhuman, mechanical, like something pretending to be human. The voice mimicked Sophie's name. Not said it, mimicked it. Too perfect in pitch, like a recording copied one too many times. Sophie paused it. But the sound continued. Not through her laptop, from the walls. Sophie started recording everything. Ambient room noise, phone calls, her own breathing while she slept. She woke one morning to find a recording she didn't start. 4 hours long. She fast-forwarded through static, rain, and distant sirens. But at 3:03 a.m., there was a sharp intake of breath. Like someone waking up beside her. A male voice whispered, "She hears us now," followed by the sound of bare feet moving across the floor. When Sophie checked her apartment cameras, set up the day before, they were all blacked out during the same time. Only the audio remained. The strings appeared again, at first just in her dreams, long black threads hanging from the ceiling like spiderwebs. They moved slowly, like they were breathing, reaching. Then one day, while brushing her hair, she felt a knot behind her ear. It hurt when she touched it, like something was tied beneath the skin. She checked in the mirror. There was nothing there. But when she pressed record and spoke to her phone, the playback caught something else. "She's tangled." Pulled her tighter. She smashed the phone. But the whisper continued from the sink drain. 2 weeks passed. Sophie started sleepwalking. Neighbors complained of music playing at 3 a.m., though she never turned on the stereo. And then came the knock. Single knock. Not at her door. At her window, 3rd floor. She opened the curtain to find a woman standing there, drenched in shadow, her face unseen. But the silhouette was familiar. It looked like Elena. Sophie stumbled backward. When she looked, again the window was empty. Only black string dangled from the top frame, waving in the wind. Desperate, Sophie visited David Mears, the retired DJ from the island, who had moved to the mainland years ago. He lived in a crumbling old bookstore, surrounded by radios, tape, decks and walls of reel-to-reel archives. She told him everything. David showed her a locked cabinet. Inside were frequency maps, handwritten logs, and cassette tapes marked Unsolved Transmissions. He played one dated 1979. A woman whispered in static, "He waits in the frequencies between rooms. In the noise. He follows the humming of machines, and the buzz of thoughts." David looked at her gravely. "You let him in." Sophie said nothing. "He doesn't just haunt places," David said. "He haunts recordings, and now he's using you to spread." That night, Sophie received an invitation in the mail. No name, no return address, just a black envelope with a ticket. A performance of silence, 3:33 a.m. Location: mirror. The ticket pulsed slightly under her fingers. She threw it away. At 3:33 a.m., she woke up to music. Elena's song, but slowed, deepened, like it was coming from underwater. Drawn by some unseen force, Sophie walked to the mirror. The glass warped, curved inward like a vortex. And there she saw it. The string man, long, faceless, threads dangling from his fingers moving like tendrils. He raised one hand, her mirror self obeyed. Sophie couldn't move. The string man whispered, "Your silence sings louder than screams." The mirror shattered. Sophie collapsed. She awoke in her bed. Everything was normal. But something was wrong with her reflection. It blinked when she didn't. It smiled when she cried, and it whispered while she slept. Sophie no longer trusted silence. In the days following the mirror incident, she began hearing static in her jaw, like radio waves were being picked up through her teeth. Dentists found nothing, but Sophie could swear she felt vibrations every time the city grew quiet. That's when the dreams intensified. She'd wake up with black threads on her pillow, tangled like roots. Once she woke choking, pulling string from her mouth like a magician, with scarves. It never ended. She stopped sleeping. The old DJ, David Mears, called one night. "Something's changed," he said. "He's begun broadcasting." David had tapped into a dead shortwave station at 2.321 MHz, an abandoned frequency. Now, it played numbers on repeat, in a child's voice. 3, 9, 11, 33, 1, 1, 3, over and over. Sometimes, a deep, distorted voice interrupted. "You're listening. Good." David had traced the signal's origin to a decommissioned radio tower miles outside the city, an old Cold War relic. Government records claimed it was inactive. David didn't believe that, and neither did Sophie. David gave Sophie a tape he found in the tower's archives. It had no label, but on playback, it revealed a ritual. A woman's voice chanting in reverse, whispering about frequencies, thoughts, sacrifices. Every verse layered beneath waves of static, screams, and radio pulses. Near the end of the tape, someone whispered, "The broadcast must not be broken." That night, Sophie's apartment filled with white noise, coming from every speaker, even those unplugged. The voices returned. They whispered of a stage, a signal, a bloodletting performance. The whispers led Sophie to a forgotten place. The Atlas Theater, boarded up since 1987, she broke in. The stage was still intact. Rows of dusty red chairs, cobwebs hung like veils, but in the center of the stage someone had constructed a strange altar, circular, made of old cassette reels and radio parts, cables stretched out like veins. At the altar's heart, a microphone, cracked but upright. On the wall behind it, "To sing is to surrender," Sophie ran, but not before hearing a voice from the shadows whisper, "Don't forget your cue." Sophie's thoughts were no longer private. She'd begun hearing her own voice in the static, repeating things she hadn't said yet. One morning, her voice came through her phone before she spoke aloud. "Don't go to the window." She froze. Then, the blinds lifted themselves, and there he was, the string man, standing on the fire escape, wires threaded through his limbs, a face made of cassette tape stretched thin across a void. He raised a hand. Sophie blacked out. She awoke in the Atlas Theater, on stage. The altar now surrounded her. Microphones pointed in every direction. Antique radios buzzed and hissed around her like an audience. A spotlight turned on. A familiar figure walked forward. It was Elena, or something wearing Elena's shape. Elena opened her mouth, but instead of words, a shriek of feedback erupted, then static. Then the string man's voice. Begin. The radios lit up. The broadcast began. Sophie didn't remember what she said, or sang, or screamed. She only knew her voice wasn't her own. The moment her lips moved, she felt a part of her soul unwind, like black thread pulled from the depths of her brain. She wept on stage. The radios replied. She saw faces in the static, hundreds of them. People listening, watching, all across the world. Some wept, some screamed, some smiled, and somewhere far away someone whispered, "She's the new frequency now." When Sophie woke, the theater was empty. The radios were silent, but the world had changed. People on the street looked up when she passed, noticed her, listened. At night, strange letters arrived at her door, blank inside but soaked with static. When she spoke near electronics, they flickered. The ritual hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Sophie began covering her mirrors, first with sheets, then tape. Then she smashed them. But even without glass, reflections found her. She'd catch her double in puddles, turn just a second too late. Her reflection blinked when she didn't, smiled when she wept. It first spoke to her in the studio. "Sink. You opened the stage. You can't shut the curtain." The voice came from her own lips, only not hers. Sophie noticed something strange. Every night, around 3:33 a.m., her body moved on its own. She would wake up standing in front of a mirror that wasn't there. Sometimes it was her bathroom. Other times, the window caught her silhouette just right. But each time, her reflection would move half a second behind, until it didn't. One night, it smiled back and said, "You're in the wrong side," or something wearing her face. Elena knocked on Sophie's door. Same voice, same eyes, but colder. She brought Sophie a gift, a shard of mirror in a velvet pouch. "You need to see clearly again." Sophie didn't take it. But that night, she found the shard inside her bed. Staring into it, she didn't see her bedroom. She saw the Atlas Theater, lights flickering, microphones still set. A dark shape sat in the front row, watching. Her bedroom, mirror returned. She didn't bring it. It just appeared, nailed to the wall where the bookshelf had been. She tried to smash it, but her hammer went through nothing, like it was just illusion. That night, she saw someone else's room reflected. A man sitting in the dark, sobbing, clutching headphones. On the mirror's bottom corner, a sticky note. She sang the signal. "Now I hear her." Then the apartment began to change. Sophie woke one morning to find everything reversed. Doorknobs on the left instead of the right. Light switches flipped. Her own handwriting reversed in the mirror. It wasn't just a trick. She wasn't in her apartment anymore. She was in its noise returned, like someone crawling through her ceiling. She found strings falling through the vents. Once she reached to pull one and heard herself scream from inside the walls. Then came the vision. A woman, sewn together from reflections, pressed against the ceiling like a spider. Her head twisted upside down, mouth hanging open. She whispered, "The loop is closing. You'll be the last note." Sophie began repeating full days. She saw herself go to the kitchen before she consciously moved. Objects were out of place, then returned, then gone again. The TV played an interview with her, one she never gave. The version of her on-screen said, "I just wanted the music to mean something. and then bled black thread from her nose. At 3:33 a.m., Sophie returned to the mirror. The entire apartment began vibrating with radio static. Strings poured from the walls. Her reflection stood waiting, wearing her face, holding the shard of glass Elena had given her. "Choose, broadcast or break," Sophie screamed. She ran straight into the mirror and shattered everything. Sophie woke in her bed, normal again, until she looked at her phone. New message. "You broke the wrong side." Then her reflection turned and walked away on its own, disappearing into darkness. Sophie was no longer in control. It started slowly. People around Sophie changed. Strangers stopped mid-step when she passed. Heads tilted, mouths moved soundlessly, mouthing her lyrics, songs she never released. A barista at the cafe bled from her ears and smiled. "Loved your last performance." Then she collapsed. Her phone buzzed. Missed call. The broadcast, Sophie, never answered. Her apartment turned against her. Radios she never owned began appearing, buried in drawers, inside the fridge, sewn into her mattress. Each one whispered in a different voice. "We heard her. She brought him through. Play it again." In the mirror, her reflection rotted. Hair black and slick with shadow. Eyes gone. Teeth replaced by broken strings. Encore. Sophie found symbols carved into the stairwell of her building. Concentric radio waves stitched with black thread. She followed the marks to a basement door sealed shut for years. Inside, a group of people sat in silence, eyes bleeding, mouths sewn with wires. At the front, David, the old DJ. But he was no longer David. He smiled and whispered through static, "The frequency needs you." And then, "The next transmission is live." The Atlas Theater opened again, fully lit. Music playing. Sophie walked through the double doors to find hundreds of audience members, all faceless, features blurred by flickering static. They clapped without sound. The stage lights flared. At the center, her body standing, dressed in wires, strings tangled through her throat. Her own voice echoed overhead. "Welcome to the final frequency." The broadcast began. Sophie's mouth moved, but she wasn't singing. The sound came from inside the earth, vibrating through concrete, cables, blood. The walls split open, revealing memories twisted into screams. Her mother weeping, Elena's body floating in the lake, her childhood bedroom crumbling under invisible weight. A massive speaker descended from the ceiling, leaking black liquid and screaming teeth. The audience roared with applause. "Play us out," they said in unison. Sophie's skin cracked like porcelain. Strings erupted from her mouth, hands, eyes. She saw versions of herself seated in the audience, dying, crying, clapping, laughing. Time collapsed. She was in every mirror she'd ever looked into. She was the voice in David's radio, the singer on the dead station, the feedback in the static. There was no Sophie, only signal. News stations began crashing. Radios turned to static worldwide. People collapsed in malls, streets, airports. Ears bleeding, eyes turned upward. All hearing the same thing. Sophie's voice. Her final song, titled only. I did not mean to open it. The Atlas Theater burned. When authorities entered, they found only wires. No bodies. No records of any performance. Sophie was never seen again. But radios still pick up a broadcast at 3:33 a.m. A girl singing alone, weeping, and in the background, a deep voice. The performance never ends. Story 3. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Claire Morgan's old sedan. as it turned onto Ashridge Lane. A row of dying poplars swayed gently in the wind, their brittle branches clawing at the overcast sky. At the end of the road stood the Morgan estate, tall and weathered, its gables scabbed with moss and time. It had once been white, now the siding peeled like skin after a burn. Claire sat in the driver's seat, unmoving. Her hands, resting on the steering wheel, trembled with a silent rhythm. Her breath fogged the windshield. The house had not changed. She wished it had. Behind the fogged glass, the house loomed, bigger than memory, smaller than hope. It was a structure that held too many silences, too many unanswered knocks, and far too many locked doors. She ran a hand across her swollen belly and whispered to the child, "It's only for a while." The front door opened before she reached the steps. Margaret Morgan, her mother, stood like a monument on the threshold, elegant in her posture, but cold in the eyes. She wore black, as always, as if perpetually mourning something, or someone. "You're late," Margaret said. Claire lifted her suitcase with both hands. "Traffic!" Margaret's gaze dropped to Claire's stomach, lingered there with unreadable calculation, then flicked away. "Come in. The house is cold." It was more than cold. It was suffocating. Inside, the Morgan home smelled of lemon, polish, and dried roses. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath Claire's boots like an old man's complaint. Dust had gathered in corners despite the tidy appearance. The house was clean but not lived in, museum-like. Edward Morgan, Claire's father, lay silent in a reclining chair in the parlor, his face hollowed by illness. His eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and watery, and he offered a whisper of a smile. He tried to speak but only coughed. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder and said nothing. She offered no comfort, no words, just the quiet pressure of fingers that had once held surgical precision. Claire didn't speak to him, not yet. Instead, she climbed the stairs to the second floor where her old bedroom waited, untouched. Same wallpaper, pink carnations, same mirror with a crack running through the left corner, same closet door that never shut properly. She closed the door behind her and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. That night, rain tapped at the windows like fingernails. Claire couldn't sleep. The mattress beneath her felt foreign, the air thick with lavender and something else. Something sour. She sat up. The lullaby came softly, twinkling notes on a music box. Claire's blood froze. It was coming from the nursery. She hadn't been in that room in years. It had been sealed after Lily died. She stepped into the hallway. The air was colder here. She passed the wall of family portraits, faces watching her in shadowed expressions. Her own eyes, in a childhood photo, stared back wide and unknowable. The nursery door creaked open before she touched it. The music box rested on the dresser, open and spinning. A porcelain ballerina twirled slowly, arms raised to nothing. Claire stepped forward. Her breath misted in front of her. The mobile above the crib began to sway on its own. "No," she whispered, retreating. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, heart racing. The music stopped. Days passed. Claire tried to focus on her writing, a dissertation about prenatal psychology, but her thoughts tangled like ivy on a tomb. Margaret watched her constantly, as if waiting for her to slip. She offered no warmth, no curiosity about the baby, only judgment cloaked in silence. Edward had become a shadow, his body present, his mind elsewhere. He mumbled names in his sleep. Sometimes Claire thought she heard her own. Sometimes she thought she heard Lily's. Claire asked Margaret once, "Why keep the nursery intact?" Margaret answered without looking up from her knitting. Some things don't need to be buried. That evening, Claire walked into the back garden where the old greenhouse stood, vines crawling through broken glass. She remembered playing there with Lily, dirt under their nails, pretending to grow magic plants. She heard a laugh. A child's laugh. Claire turned sharply. The shadows in the greenhouse shifted, and a shape darted behind a rusted shelf. Something small. Something fast. She entered the greenhouse slowly, every instinct telling her not to. "Lily?" she said, the name falling from her lips before she realized. No answer. Only silence and the stench of mold. She turned to leave. Fingerprints smeared the fogged glass on the inside. Small ones. Back in the house, Margaret poured herself a glass of red wine and said nothing as Claire stood, shivering, in the hallway. "I saw her," Claire whispered. "Of course you did," Margaret replied. That night, Claire woke to the sound of breathing. Not her own, not her husband's. He was long gone. She turned and saw a figure standing at the foot of her bed. Small. Pale. She blinked. Gone. But the closet door creaked open slowly. Inside hung a white dress. Lily's. Still stained with the rust-colored spots they said came from a fall down the stairs. Claire couldn't breathe. She turned toward the mirror on the dresser. Behind her, just for a second, Lily stood, eyes black as coal, mouth sewn shut. Then the mirror cracked down the middle. Claire woke the next morning with her hands clenched around the music box. The ballerina's face had been scratched off. She looked down at her hands, blood under the nails. Rain never seemed to stop on Ashridge Lane. The clouds hung low, suffocating the sky, and water pooled in the cracks of the crumbling brick path that wound through the Morgan estate. Claire sat in the kitchen, watching droplets slide down the window like nervous fingers tapping glass. Margaret cooked in silence. No conversation, no humming, just the rhythmic chop of a knife against the cutting board. Carrots, peeled and sliced into uniform rounds, like the way she used to do for Lily. Long before Claire left. Long before her father grew skeletal and silent. Claire stirred her tea, eyes distant. "Do you ever think about her?" Margaret didn't. Pause her chopping. "I think about many things. That's not an answer. It's the only one you'll get." Claire stood. Her mug trembled in her hand. She didn't fall down the stairs. Margaret set the knife down slowly, carefully. "Be careful what you drag up. Some things are better left in the dark." The nursery door was sealed again. Claire knew she hadn't shut it. And the mobile above the crib? It now spun even when the air was still. She began recording the odd occurrences in a notebook. Missing objects, voices heard through the walls, shadows slipping between rooms. She drew a diagram of the house and began to mark every place she heard whispering. Most of the marks clustered around the attic door. One night, Claire awoke to music again. Not the music box. This time it was strings. Violins, out of tune and slow, like fingers dragging across catgut. The sound came from above her, from the attic. She climbed the stairs in her nightgown, each step creaking under her weight. Her bare feet felt like they were treading ice. The door to the attic stood slightly ajar, blackness yawning behind it. As she pushed it open, the sound stopped. Dust swirled in the beam of her flashlight. Old trunks, mannequins draped in moth-eaten lace, a rocking horse with one eye. In the corner, something glinted. A wooden marionette. Hand-carved, child-sized, with a painted face cracked like porcelain. She approached it slowly. The strings attached to it snaked upward into the ceiling and disappeared into the dark. She reached out to touch it. The head jerked to face her. Claire screamed and stumbled back, but when the flashlight steadied, the puppet was inanimate again, still, lifeless. But one of its painted eyes was missing. Downstairs, Edward murmured in his sleep, "Lily! Lily, no!" Margaret caught her in the hallway the next day. "Stay out of the attic." Claire stared at her. "Why?" "Because that's not your room anymore." "It never was," Claire said, almost to herself. She began to hear tapping behind the walls. At night, it grew louder. Not rats, not pipes, rhythmic, insistent. 1, 2, 3. Silence. 1, 2, 3. It felt deliberate. She followed the sound one night, pressing her ear to the wood paneling near the nursery. From the other side, she heard, "Claire." Not a whisper. A voice. Small. Female. Familiar. She recoiled and ran to Margaret. "There's something in the walls!" Margaret didn't even look up from her sewing. "Then leave it there." Claire dug into the basement records, the old family boxes stored in mildew and dust. Birth certificates, death certificates, photos. She found one photo she had never seen before, her mother younger, smiling beside a crib. But it wasn't Lily in the crib. It was another baby, labeled Eleanor. There had never been an Eleanor. Had there? She confronted Margaret. "Who is Eleanor?" Margaret didn't blink. "There is no Eleanor. You're lying. You're not well, Claire. You're imagining things again. Just like before." Claire's voice cracked. "What do you mean? Again?" Margaret turned away. "You were a sick child. You saw things. I saw you dragging Lily's body down the stairs." Margaret slapped her, hard. The silence after was deeper than the sound. That night, Claire heard the lullaby again, but this time it played backward, twisted, mocking. She stood in the hallway, staring at the nursery. The door was wide open. Inside, the mobile spun violently. A child sat in the crib. Skin like wax. Black, empty eyes. Lily, but not Lily. She reached for Claire through the bars. Her mouth opened slowly. Blood dripped from her lips. She spoke, though her lips didn't move. "She lied to us, Claire. She buried us," Claire screamed. The lights burst overhead. The baby vanished, but in the crib sat a single tooth. The next morning, Claire woke with the tooth clenched in her fist. Her palm was bleeding. And down the hallway, the closet door in her old room was wide open, scratched inside the wood. "Eleanor wants out." The house on Ashridge Lane felt tighter with every passing day. Its walls closer, its air thicker. Claire could no longer tell what time it was. The clocks had begun to tick in reverse. She tried to leave, tried to pack her suitcase and get in her car. The car wouldn't start. She checked the battery. Wires were clean. Gas was full. But the moment she stepped away, she saw it. A small handprint on the inside of the windshield. She returned inside. Edward sat at the window, staring into the gray woods beyond the garden. He barely acknowledged her anymore, lost in his mutterings. 2 daughters. 2 names. 1 forgotten. "Who was Eleanor?" Claire asked, kneeling by him. He shook his head. "Don't dig. Don't remember. If you remember her, she remembers you." In the attic, the marionette had moved. Its strings now trailed across the floor, tangled like veins. Claire found a small dollhouse that looked exactly like the Morgan estate. Each room was furnished in precise detail. Inside the nursery, the tiny crib held a figure, a baby. As she watched, the doll's head turned to face her. Then the music box began to play. Downstairs, on its own. Claire fled the attic. That night, she dreamed of fire, of a child screaming behind a locked door, crib burning, and Margaret standing in the hallway whispering, she was never supposed to be born. The next day, Claire tore through the family records again. Beneath the loose floorboard in the basement, she found a sealed envelope. Inside, a birth certificate, a hospital bracelet labeled Eleanor Morgan, and a note, born broken, taken away, buried in silence. Margaret cannot know, signed by her father. Claire confronted him again. You had another child, he sobbed, eyes distant. We weren't allowed to keep her. The priest said she was a bad omen, a mistake, but she came back anyway. Margaret interrupted them, voice cold. She wasn't a mistake. She was mine. Silence. She was never buried. She's here. That night Claire heard scratching behind the walls. Then laughter. A child's laughter. She followed it down the hallway, flashlight flickering. It led her to a mirror, but her reflection was wrong. It was smiling. And behind her, in the reflection, stood a girl in a black dress, face pale with blood trailing. From her mouth, Claire spun. No one there. The mirror shattered. Margaret began sealing. Rooms, hammering doors shut, nailing the nursery closed, painting sigils on the walls. Claire screamed at her. What are you hiding? Margaret whispered. There are places in this house she can't enter. Yet. But if you keep calling her, she'll find a way. She's my sister. She's not anyone's anything anymore. Claire saw Eleanor again, in the cellar this time, kneeling in the dark, tearing pages from a hymn book with fingers that ended in splinters. Her eyes were empty holes. Her voice echoed like 1,000 insects. Play with me. Stay with me. You're all I have left. Claire fled, locking the cellar behind her. She noticed then that her hands were trembling, and her fingernails were turning black. Edward died the next day. In his sleep, face frozen in horror. The coroner found nothing wrong with his heart. Nothing at all. Just a child's tooth lodged in his throat. Margaret began to unravel, burning old family photos, tearing pages from her diary. Claire found her kneeling in the garden at night, digging a hole for her to go back. Claire begged her to stop. She doesn't want to go back. She wants us. Margaret didn't answer. That night, Claire returned to her room to find her own childhood diary lying on the bed. But every page had changed. All the writing was in red ink now. Each page ended with the same phrase, over and over. You forgot me. You left me. Claire collapsed. Her memories fragmented. Was Eleanor real? Had she ever been? Or was she Claire's invention? A coping mechanism. A shared delusion. But when she looked up at the wall, Eleanor was there, smiling. Claire tried to leave again, but the front door was gone. Just a wall. The house had sealed itself. And somewhere upstairs, the music box began to play again, in reverse. The wind howled around the house as if mourning something long dead. Inside, the Morgan home had grown colder. Paint peeled from the corners. Wooden beams groaned overhead. Even when the air was still, the fireplace never stayed lit anymore. Claire hadn't seen Margaret in days. Her mother no longer spoke. Just wandered the halls with red strings wrapped around her wrists like restraints. Claire noticed one morning that the old woman had started muttering numbers under her breath. 14, 17, 22. When asked what they meant, Margaret only whispered, "Those are the steps from her crib to the fire." Claire tore through the nursery again, determined to understand. Behind the toy chest, she found something hidden, a torn section of wallpaper revealing scribbled writing underneath. Dozens of phrases carved into the plaster with a nail. "I'm still here. Let me in. You said I could stay." The name Eleanor appeared over and over, and beneath it, in Claire's own childhood handwriting, was a message. "I saw her burn." I watched her smile. Shaken, Claire searched the attic. She found a locked chest at the very back, behind the insulation. Keys didn't work. She pried it open with a crowbar and found a scorched baby blanket, an old tape recorder, and a bundle of bones wrapped in a singed nightgown. She dropped the bundle. One of the bones still had a gold bracelet around it. The name on the tag read, "Eleanor Claire ran downstairs." The hallway was longer than it had ever been, impossibly long. Doors on either side now stood open that had never been there before, revealing impossible rooms. A decaying church with hanging dolls, a blood-stained nursery with dozens of cribs, and a woman in black seated at a vanity, brushing her hair even as her face peeled. Claire screamed. All the lights in the house burst. She found Margaret in the kitchen, holding a knife to her chest, blood already seeping through her nightgown. "She's inside the walls," Margaret whispered. "She never left." Claire begged her to stop. "She's punishing us, Claire. We broke her. We buried her, but she lived on. Inside this house. Inside you." Margaret shoved the knife into her own stomach. As Claire screamed, the room went dark. When the lights flickered back on, Margaret was gone. So was the blood. Only the knife remained, lying on the table, clean. For the first time, Claire realized the house had begun to breathe. She could feel it, the floorboards subtly rising and falling beneath her feet. The walls seemed to swell outward and contract inward, as if the entire house had become a living lung, pulling in grief and exhaling rot. Desperate, Claire used the old tape recorder. The tape crackled to life, Margaret's voice from decades ago. "This is for the record. The girl is wrong. She doesn't sleep. She watches. She waits. We tried to seal her, but the house remembers. Claire is starting to see her again. She says they talk. I never should have let them play together. I never should have let her live. Eleanor never died in that fire. Not completely." Claire dropped the recorder. It burst into flame in her hand. The sound of footsteps echoed above her. Small, quick, like a child running. She chased them upstairs. Every door slammed shut behind her. At the end of the hallway, the nursery door stood, open now. The red strings Margaret had nailed across it had been shredded. Inside, the crib rocked on its own. The mobile above spun rapidly, playing a reversed lullaby. And in the crib sat something drenched in shadow, its face hidden but smiling. Claire approached. The shadow figure lifted its arms, beckoning like a child wanting to be held. Claire reached out. Just as her fingers touched it, a scream split the house in half, rising from the floorboards, from the walls, from inside her own throat. She collapsed. When she awoke, it was morning, or something pretending to be morning. Light came in through the windows, but it was gray, rotten. Dust floated like ash. The door was gone again. Every exit bricked over. The house had sealed shut. Claire wandered for hours, or days. Time meant nothing anymore. In the hallway mirror, her reflection changed, her hair longer, eyes black. A small girl behind her, laughing. She tried to break the mirror. Her fists bled. but the glass didn't crack. Instead, her reflection stepped away from the mirror and kept walking, disappearing into the hallway behind her. Claire turned empty, but she heard Eleanor's voice echoing, "You're ready now. To remember." Claire found Margaret's body later that day, in the crawl space, wrapped in red thread, nailed to the beams like a doll. A smile carved into her face. And beneath her was the word "sister" written in ash. The walls began to bleed. The lights whispered names. The music box played itself from inside the walls. Claire screamed into the void, "What do you want from me?" And Eleanor answered, "I want you to finish the story, the one you forgot." Claire wandered the house barefoot. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow. The bruises on her arms were not her own. They seemed to belong to another version of her, a forgotten twin, a ghost stitched into a reflection. The house had changed again. Rooms had moved, doors opened to nowhere. Some opened to scenes from the past, or something imitating it. She stepped into one and saw herself as a child, playing with blocks. Sitting across from her was another girl, identical except for burn scars that traced her jaw and neck like cruel lacework. The girl turned to face the adult Claire, smiled, whispered, "You left me in the fire." In what used to be the study, Claire found a leather-bound book, not a journal, not a Bible, something older. The pages were soft, stitched together with thread that looked disturbingly like human hair. Inside, Margaret's handwriting bled across the pages. "There is no will, only consequence. We were supposed to seal the door, after she burned, but she never died. She stayed, attached. Claire fed her without knowing. Every night she whispered into Claire's dreams, until Claire stopped dreaming at all." Claire kept reading, heart pounding. If you're reading this, then you've seen her. And you remember, you were twins. She was real. The birth certificate was forged. Eleanor was erased, her death covered up. But a child erased doesn't vanish. She roots, she anchors, she haunts. You are the bloodline now. She's part of you. Claire slammed the book shut. A scream erupted from the walls. Books flew from the shelves. One hit her in the back. Another smashed the mirror beside her. Claire fell to the floor, blood leaking from her nose. Something had pierced the veil. Eleanor was no longer whispering from behind the walls. She was inside them. Claire traced the thread. Red yarn now wrapped through the hallway like veins. It led her to the basement, a place she had avoided. The door had once been sealed with boards. Now it stood wide open. The descent was suffocating. The air grew thick, moldy, laced with copper and smoke. The stairs groaned as if bearing memory, not weight. At the bottom, Claire found portraits. Her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother. Each woman held a child. Each woman had scratched out one of the children's faces. Some of the frames bled. One photo was different. It was of Margaret, young, terrified, holding two babies, the words scribbled below. "We were told only one should live." Claire turned slowly. In the far corner of the basement stood a crib made of bone. Inside it, wrapped in smoke and rags, lay something not quite human. It cooed. Then it laughed. Claire ran, but she didn't get far. The hallway above was gone. Instead, she found herself in the nursery, though it had aged 100 years. Vines grew through cracked walls. Shadows whispered. The mobile above the crib spun in reverse. On the floor, someone had written in blood, "All children grow up, except the one you buried." Claire tried to destroy the red string. She burned it, snapped it, soaked it. It always came back. Sometimes, it reappeared wrapped around her wrists while she slept. One morning she woke with her hands bound to the bed frame, an old lullaby playing from under the floor. The house had stitched her in. She was no longer a guest. She was becoming a vessel. In the dining room, the long table had reset itself for dinner. Empty chairs surrounded it, all but one pulled out. Claire sat, unable to resist. The lights dimmed. A projector buzzed on in the corner. Home videos began to play. Her childhood. Then scenes that never happened. Eleanor screaming, Margaret dragging a child across the floor, fire rising behind them. The film burned out. Claire looked down. Her hands were blackened with soot. She ran to the mirror. Her reflection smiled back with Eleanor's eyes. "You're remembering," it whispered. "Good. Now, you must become me." In the final days of the fifth outline, Claire found the birth record in a hidden drawer. 2 names. Claire Morgan, Eleanor Morgan, born minutes apart. One declared deceased by accident. The signature belonged to Margaret. There had never been a funeral, only a binding ritual. To keep Eleanor trapped in the house, bound by blood, hidden in the walls, fed by memory, sustained by denial. Claire collapsed. She finally remembered the fire, the smell of burning skin, the scream of her twin, the door she held shut, the guilt that followed her whole life. It wasn't just haunting, it was punishment, inheritance. The fifth outline closes. The walls of the house begin to shift permanently. Reality is no longer stable. Claire begins to fade between 2 selves, the living and the ghost. The house creaks with satisfaction. Its vessel is ready. The house no longer followed the laws of space. The staircase now spiraled infinitely downward. Windows opened into black water. The rooms looped. Claire would walk into the kitchen and find herself in the nursery again. The boundaries of time and memory had broken. The house wasn't haunted. The house was haunting. And Claire, now fully merged with Eleanor's essence, could no longer tell who she had once been. One morning, the house lit itself. Candles flickered in a pentagram in the attic. Red string had woven itself into a web across the rafters, soaked with what looked like blood and milk. Claire stood at its center, still in her nightgown, barefoot. She didn't remember walking there. Around her stood phantoms of the women who came before her, Margaret, her grandmother, others unnamed, all holding burning effigies of their dead daughters. They chanted in a language older than the walls. Claire didn't understand the words, but her body did. She dropped to her knees. Her eyes rolled back. Her mouth opened, and Eleanor spoke. "You were never meant to live. You were the vessel. You were always the door." Reality began to burn, not in flame, but in memory. Rooms glitched like corrupted film. Claire saw every version of herself she had ever been. A baby, a child, a teenager crying outside the house, a woman screaming inside it. The final version stood still, head tilted, eyes white. She had become the keeper. Every attempt to leave failed. The front door led to the attic. The basement led to water. The windows were mirrors, reflecting only the horrors she carried inside. Ethan, the former neighbor who had once warned Claire to never stay overnight, returned to the property after sensing something was wrong. He forced open the rotting porch door, stepping into a home swallowed by mildew and rot. There were no lights, only candles. And somewhere deep inside, a music box played. He called her name. No answer. But the walls whispered. She belongs to the blood now. He moved deeper inside, passing portraits with bleeding eyes, and scratched words on the floor. One must burn so the other may breathe. Then he found Claire, or what remained. She stood in the center of the old living room, surrounded by dolls, stitched together with red thread. Her skin was pale. Her eyes were both hers and not. Her voice split into two. "Ethan," she said, "I never told you about Eleanor." Ethan tried to pull her out, to take her away, but the house rejected him. The moment he touched Claire's wrist, it bit down. Walls cracked, furniture shattered, the ceiling screamed. A voice, Margaret's voice, boomed from nowhere. "The house is fed. The ritual is sealed." Eleanor surged forward in Claire's body, her voice rising like fire. "You buried me once. Now I bury you." The floor split beneath Ethan. He fell into the pit, the old well, now a mouth, now a memory. His scream echoed but was swallowed. The house went still. Claire closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was standing in the past. The final scene plays out with unbearable stillness. A car pulls into the driveway. A young woman steps out. She's not Claire. Her name is Anna, Margaret's niece, sent to clean the house for sale. She doesn't know the history. She doesn't hear the whispers. But in the attic, the red thread begins to twitch. In the nursery, the music box winds itself, and deep within the walls, Claire's smile stretches too wide. Welcome home, Story 4. It began with silence, an unnatural one. Claire Dalton's old Victorian rental, crouched between rows of skeletal trees, greeted her with a stillness that seemed too still that Halloween night. She slid her keys into the lock with fingers stiff from cold and exhaustion, the wind tugging at her coat like a pleading hand. The porch light flickered, then died completely. The door creaked open. She hadn't remembered leaving it unlocked. The stale air inside was heavy, clinging to her skin like wet fabric. Her nurse bag thudded to the floor beside the door. Claire kicked off her shoes out of habit, stepped onto the hardwood, and froze. There was something on the floor. It glistened in the weak spill of moonlight bleeding through the front curtains. A dark trail led from the hallway into the kitchen, like spilled ink stretching down a page. No sound, no motion, but Claire's instincts began to scream. She reached for her phone. Before she could unlock it, a voice called from the kitchen, not loud, not panicked, but low, like it was being held underwater. "Don't scream." Claire inched forward, slow as breath, phone trembling in her hand. Her foot touched the trail. It was warm, thick, blood. She stepped into the kitchen and saw him. A man stood beside her kitchen table, drenched in blood up to his elbows. His eyes were wild, fixed on her with equal parts fury and fear. In the chair across from him sat another man, slouched, gagged, his face pulped and half unrecognizable, blood soaking his clothes and pooling under the chair. The man standing held a hammer in one hand. A butcher knife sat on the table beside him. Claire blinked. She recognized him, Ethan Brooks, a father of a child from the hospital. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Claire's voice cracked. "What? What are you doing?" Ethan didn't move. "He's not who you think he is." Claire looked at the man in the chair. Victor Hale, her landlord, a respected local businessman. His breathing was shallow, one eye swollen shut. "He hurt my daughter," Ethan said, quieter this time. "He raped her." Claire staggered back a step. Her mind reeled. Ethan held up a phone, blood smeared on the screen. "There are files, photos. He filmed it all. Others too. It wasn't just her." Claire didn't want to look. Every part of her told her to run. "You need to call the police," she whispered. "They won't touch him," Ethan said. He has them on a leash. If they get here, I'll be dead before you can blink, and he'll walk out. Victor moaned under the gag. One eye pleaded with her. You're a nurse, Ethan said. You help people. Help me stop him. Claire didn't move. In the heavy silence, a low hum vibrated through the walls. It was coming from her bedroom. She turned instinctively, then stopped. The hallway was dark, deeper than it should have been. Like shadows had grown teeth. I cut the power, Ethan said flatly. Didn't want him calling anyone. But that didn't explain the hum. Claire's chest tightened. Stay here, she said, more to herself than to him, and backed down the hallway toward her bedroom door. As she pushed it open, the hum grew louder, then stopped. Her room was empty. Nothing disturbed. Window cracked open slightly, letting in a cold breeze. The street was silent. She turned, and a shadow shifted at the end of the hallway. Claire yelped and nearly dropped her phone. It was Ethan, hammer still in hand, breathing hard. I said, don't scream, he muttered. I thought I saw... She started. There's no one else here, he said. Just us. And him. But there was something else. Something Claire hadn't noticed. Her bedroom mirror was fogged over. No one had used the shower. Words were scrawled across the glass, barely visible. You let him in, Claire stumbled back. What is this? She whispered. Ethan stared at it, face blank. Then the light above them flickered. Once, twice, then blew out. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating the walls. Claire turned to run back to the kitchen, and screamed. Victor was no longer in the chair. The ropes had been cut, and smeared across the wall in his blood were 4 words. You shouldn't have waited. Panic detonated in Claire's chest. Ethan ran past her toward the living room. The front door was wide open now. The wind howled through it like a scream. A bloody footprint led out across the porch. Claire grabbed her keys, phone, anything she could find, and followed. The street was empty. Ethan ran out into the yard. Victor, you won't get far. Then he stopped. So did Claire. In the middle of the street stood a figure, not Victor. This man wore a mask, pure black, no eyes, no mouth, like a void given shape. Behind him, more shadows began to step into the light. They were surrounding the house. Claire backed toward the door. Ethan, he turned. Get inside, now. Back inside, they locked the door, pushed furniture against it. Claire grabbed the butcher knife. Her hands shook. This wasn't part of the plan, Ethan whispered. You planned something? She hissed. I just wanted him to confess. Outside, footsteps circled the house. Whispering floated through the cracked windows. Not language, just sounds. Dry, inhuman. The house groaned under their weight. Claire stared at the mirror in the hallway again. It had fogged over once more. This time the words read, "Blood opens doors." They didn't sleep that night. They watched the windows, the doors, the shadows. The attackers never tried to break in. They didn't need to. Something else had already entered. Claire began hearing her son's voice in the walls, though he was at her sister's house. Ethan saw his dead wife standing in the hall, smiling, and in the basement, the old mirror, one Claire had never bought, reflected someone else entirely. Someone wearing Victor Hale's face, but smiling wider than humanly possible. By dawn, the shadows were gone. So was Victor. But the blood trail remained, and now, on the bathroom mirror, were the final words of the night. He opened the door. You let it stay open. Claire looked at Ethan. The horror wasn't over. It had just begun. The morning light offered no comfort. It crept through the cracks of the boarded-up windows like an unwelcome intruder. The blood was still on the floor. The writing on the mirror remained, no matter how many times Claire tried to wipe it away. Her hands trembled every time she touched the glass. He opened the door. "You let it stay open." Ethan hadn't said a word in hours. He sat on the couch, face pale and smeared with dried blood, eyes unfocused, like someone seeing ghosts he could no longer outrun. Outside, the street was quiet, too quiet for a neighborhood in the city. Claire stared at the butcher knife on the kitchen table. "Are you going to tell me everything now?" she finally asked. Ethan blinked. His voice rasped like gravel. "You wouldn't believe it." "Try. Me." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Victor Hale wasn't just some predator hiding behind a clean reputation. He was a collector. Of what? Ethan's jaw tightened. Of things that shouldn't exist. He told her about the videos, but there was more. In one, Victor opened a trapdoor in the woods and pulled out a mask, black, eyeless. Ethan had watched him put it on. When he wore it, Ethan whispered, he didn't just look different. He became something else, like something was looking through him. Claire shivered. The image of the masked man in the street returned to her. He was part of something, Ethan said. A group, or cult, I don't know. But they believe pain is a doorway. Blood is the key. Claire tried to process that. And now? You think something came through? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night they tried to leave the house. Tried. Claire's car didn't start. Ethan's was missing entirely. They tried to walk, but the street bent in unnatural ways. No matter which direction they took, they always returned to the house. The shadows were waiting at the end of every block, just past visibility. Moving, whispering. Claire screamed into the night. No one answered. The next day, the smell started. A rot that came from nowhere, yet clung to every wall. Claire opened every window. Nothing helped. The air grew heavier by the hour. Ethan found it first, beneath the floorboards of the basement. They pried it up with crowbars and found the bodies. Children, dozens of them, buried in neat, perfect rows, each one missing its face. Claire vomited. On the stairs, Ethan knelt beside the remains, silent, trembling. They weren't just victims, he said at last. They were offerings. That night, Claire dreamed of her son. He stood in the hallway of the house calling her name, but when she got close, she saw he had no eyes, just black pits like the mask. She woke up screaming. Ethan didn't wake up at all. He was standing by the window, watching something across the street. "They're coming," he said. Claire crept beside him. The figure in the mask was back, but he wasn't alone. There were dozens now, all masked, all staring at the house, not moving, not blinking, just watching. They appeared every night after that, and they got closer. Claire started seeing things when she was alone. The mirror in the bathroom showed her scenes from other houses, all with people being murdered, sacrificed, dragged away. Once, it showed a child sitting in a chair, crying quietly, before being wrapped in barbed wire by invisible hands. Another time, it showed her, standing behind herself, grinning. She shattered the mirror with a scream, but the reflection stayed, cracked and smiling. On the fifth night, Ethan disappeared. One moment, he was in the living room. The next, gone. Only his shoes remained, standing upright. Claire ran through the house screaming his name. No answer, until she checked the hallway mirror. Words etched in fresh blood, Something worse is coming. Claire tried the basement again. The bodies were gone. In their place was a door, one she swore hadn't been there before. It was iron, rusted, humming with something deep and wrong. It wasn't locked. She didn't open it. Not yet. That night she saw Ethan again, in the backyard, naked, covered in blood, eyes empty. He opened his mouth, but it wasn't his voice. It was dozens of children speaking at once. He is not our God, but he fed us well. Claire collapsed. When she woke up, her front door was wide open. The mask was lying on the doormat. The next day, her phone buzzed for the first time in a week. One message, a single video file. She opened it. It was her son, sitting in a room she didn't recognize, whispering something over and over. "Mommy, please don't wear the mask." Behind him, a dark figure leaned out of the shadows. Then the screen went black. Claire ran upstairs. The bathroom mirror had repaired itself. New words glowed, red across its surface. "To see him, you must become him." She looked out the window. The figures were now on her lawn, waiting, watching. The mask still sat by the door. Claire picked it up, held it in her hands. And as her fingers brushed its cold surface, she felt something move beneath the skin of her own face, something ancient, something hungry. The mask sat in Claire's hands, cold, unforgiving, breathing. It pulsed like flesh beneath her touch, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Every instinct screamed at her to throw it away, to burn it, to flee. But there was nowhere to run. No road, no neighbor, no phone call that would reach outside this cursed orbit. She stood by the doorway, the line between her world and theirs, paper thin. The lawn was empty now. They had stepped away. Because she had touched it. Because she was considering. That night, the house changed again. Claire heard whispers in the walls, conversations in dead languages, chanting, low sobbing. Floorboards shifted beneath her steps like things were alive underneath. She boarded the doors. She barricaded the windows, but the house was no longer hers. It started with the mirrors. Every reflective surface in the house showed different versions of Claire. One was smiling, blood dripping from her lips. Another was blindfolded, arms outstretched, in the hallway. A third stared back with eyes removed and replaced by keys. Then they all whispered the same words in unison. "He is awake now." Claire found Ethan's journal behind the furnace. Its pages were written in a frantic scrawl, the ink smudged, sometimes overwritten with symbols that bled through the paper. He had been researching the cult, the mask, the rituals. A passage stood out. The mask is not just a relic. It is an entity. It doesn't possess a person. It becomes them. Blood opens its mouth. Pain feeds it. Sacrifice keeps it quiet. But only for a while. It does not like being ignored. Claire stopped sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, the house groaned. The walls bulged. The lights flickered with a rhythm like breathing. The door in the basement throbbed. Each night it creaked a little further open on its own, and with each inch, the house remembered. Rooms she'd never seen appeared behind hallways that never existed. Nursery with no child. A hospital room with restraints stained brown. A church, lit only by candles dripping black wax. On the seventh night, Claire bled. She woke to find long, clean cuts across her thighs, surgical, deliberate, no weapon near. Her bed, no blood on the sheets, just one sentence written on her wall in crimson finger marks. "The mask demands blood." Claire tried to destroy it. She buried it in the woods. She burned it in the fireplace. She threw it into the river behind the house. Each time she returned home, it was waiting for her, on her pillow, at the foot of the stairs. Once, inside the refrigerator, still dripping, she began to lose time. Wake up in different clothes, find fresh food she didn't cook, answer voicemails from numbers she didn't know. And the house? The house began to smell of copper and decay. She found another Ethan in the attic, but this one didn't speak. He was tied in barbed wire, jaw unhinged and hollowed out from the inside, as if something had nested inside him. Yet his eyes followed her as she left. The door in the basement was wide open now, and there were stairs going down, far, far down, deeper than any foundation should go. Claire didn't enter. Not yet. Instead, she sat at the dining room table, the mask in front of her. A voice, her own, spoke from the walls. You know what he wants. That evening, someone knocked on the door. It was the woman across the street, Mrs. Carter. Claire hadn't seen her in weeks. Her eyes were sunken, her skin almost translucent. Is it happening again? She asked gently. Claire stared at her. You knew? I was here when Victor Hale wore it first. Claire's blood ran cold. Then you know how to stop it. Mrs. Carter shook her head. You can't stop it, dear. You can only feed it, or it will feed on everything. She handed Claire a knife and walked into the woods. Claire never saw her again. That night, Claire wore the mask, just for a second, and in that second, she saw everything. She saw Ethan's death on repeat. Different deaths, 1,000 variations. She saw the ritual altar beneath the house, slick with gore. She saw herself, kneeling over a child, smiling. When she tore the mask off, she vomited black bile. The next day, the mirrors shattered on their own. Blood leaked. From the vents, the house sang. Claire didn't cry anymore. She boiled the knife in water, set the candles, painted the marks. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she didn't remember memorizing. A woman answered. Calm, emotionless. Are you ready to give him what he wants? Claire nodded, and the woman said, We're coming. That night, the street was lined with cars. People stepped out in black robes. No faces, no speech. Just the rhythmic sound of something large moving beneath the pavement. Claire opened the door and let them in. One by one, they descended into the basement. She followed last. The door shut behind her. In the dark, something massive breathed. A shape, a hunger. The mask, worn by Claire, glowed with ancient symbols. She stood on the altar and welcomed her guests, with the knife in hand. The first scream echoed through the ground. The second shattered the foundation. The third was not human. The house had stopped creaking, not because it was silent, but because it was listening. Claire no longer marked the days. Clocks spun aimlessly, and the sun no longer visited the windows in full. Shadows stretched where they shouldn't, across ceilings, across her skin, across her memories. Her eyes, once brown, now held a sliver of something unnatural. A molten gold that shimmered when she passed by cracked glass. The cult had come and gone, and left offerings in the basement, wrapped in canvas, bound in twine, still warm. Claire didn't ask who they were. The mask fed, and in return, it whispered. It showed her the blueprints of the house, how each room was built in perfect ritual symmetry, designed to channel something beneath the floorboards. Not a spirit, a god, not one remembered, but one awaiting reconstruction. Claire walked barefoot now. Her toes left black ash trails along the wood. The house responded to her presence. Walls bent to her breath. Floorboards shifted like vertebrae under her feet. Doors opened not when touched, but when desired. She didn't sleep. She simply watched. Upstairs, the rooms changed again. The guest room became a temple, the bedroom a mortuary, and the study. The study became a chamber of faces. Every mirror, every photograph, altered to reflect a woman with no mouth and eyes like open graves. Claire did not scream when she saw them. She nodded because she recognized her future. She found Ethan's voice, trapped inside an old phonograph sealed in the crawl space. The recording was broken, warbled, but his last words were clear. It's not a mask, it's a mouth, and it's hungry. One morning, Claire opened the front door and found a man kneeling on the porch. His eyes were missing. His hands held out an offering, his own tongue. He smiled. "Let me serve." She let him in. Word had spread. More arrived. Broken people. Lost people. Devoted. They did not speak. They only bled. And the mask began to hum in her presence. A low, pulsing sound like an unborn heartbeat. Claire's neighbors disappeared. Their windows blackened, their lawns overgrown, their memories erased. The town shrunk around her. Maps failed to display her street. GPS froze when someone tried to search her address. She was a hole in the world now, and the house was growing around her. One afternoon, she stood in the attic and found her own body hanging. It twitched. Its eyes opened, and it whispered, "Do it better this time." Claire didn't question anymore. She rebuilt the basement altar in exact measurements shown to her in visions. She sourced ancient stone. She dug deeper, through earth, through bones, through memory. She found the foundation of something inhuman. Teeth etched into stone, ribs made from iron. It wasn't a crypt, it was a cradle. The police finally came. 3 officers, guns drawn. One of them recognized her from her days in child services. "Claire, it's over. Come out." She invited them in. Only one made it back, to his car. He drove in silence for 3 hours before putting a bullet in his head, leaving a note that read, "The house smiled at me." Claire's skin began to change. Veins glowed faint blue. Her voice echoed, even in empty rooms. She stood taller, her silhouette sharper. The house mirrored her. Walls warped into flesh-like curves. Pipes pulsed like arteries. Light flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat. One night, a group of children trespassed. Teenagers on a dare. They made it as far as the foyer. By the time they tried to leave, the front door had vanished, replaced with a brick wall, its mortar made from their own teeth. Their screams fed the basement. Furnace for hours. Claire never flinched. She stood by the mantel, wearing the mask, and listening to them beg. The cult returned, this time with gifts. Scrolls bound in skin, knives that could cut through thought. One of them whispered in a forgotten dialect, and Claire understood. They anointed her as the mouth of the house, the one who would speak when the god awoke. The final offering arrived wrapped in linen, a woman, pregnant, unconscious. Claire leaned down and whispered, "He's hungry." Then she turned to the others and nodded. The ritual began. The storm came. Lightning struck the same tree 6 times. Crows flew in reverse. Dogs barked at things no one could see. The town shut down. Lights failed. Phones died. Everyone heard the same sound in their sleep. A door opening slowly. Claire no longer walked. She floated. Her feet never touched the floor. The house followed her, and its walls whispered her name like a prayer or a warning. On the final night of the outline, she entered the basement. The stone cradle cracked open, and something began to move inside. It smelled like wet iron and old sin. Claire knelt. She whispered, "I built this house for you." From the dark, it answered in 1,000 voices, "Then I shall wear your skin." The air in the house grew thicker, like breathing through gauze soaked in something dead. Claire no longer looked like Claire. Her limbs moved with a grace that wasn't hers. Her eyes shone black like polished onyx. Her voice, when she used it, seemed to come from a deep cave, echoing through her throat as though carried by something older. The mask no longer hung on the wall. It wore her. In the cellar, the gay cradle pulsed. The god beneath stirred, its bones vibrating through the foundation. The walls wept moisture that tasted of blood and salt. The house trembled softly when no one moved, responding not to action but to thought. The cult, once composed of murmuring acolytes, had grown bold. They painted sigils in the neighbors' homes. They cut out the tongues of doubters. They carried their own infants down Claire's hall, wrapped in black cloth, and left them in her arms. She never questioned their meaning. The mask whispered, "They are the first choir." Claire began to dream with her eyes open. She saw visions not of the future or past, but of a place between. A wasteland where the sky was the color of raw meat, and the soil writhed with blind worms. She would wake standing in corners, her fingernails buried in the plaster, speaking in a tongue she didn't know. She didn't remember speaking, but the walls remembered. They echoed her words for hours. One afternoon, an old friend from college knocked on the door. Marissa Graham, a documentary filmmaker who had heard rumors about the strange happenings on Claire's street. She wanted to help. She wanted answers. Claire invited her in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marissa stayed for 3 days. On the 4th, she begged to leave. She screamed that the mirrors wouldn't reflect her anymore, that the bathtub whispered about drowning her baby brother. Claire never locked the doors. But when Marissa tried to run, the windows stretched, turning into laughing, mouths that bit when touched. She was last seen dragging herself across the front lawn, blind and clawing at the dirt, whispering, "I saw it in her face. I saw it behind her face." Claire was changing. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She no longer moved like a person, but like a memory trying to walk in human skin. The town responded with paranoia. Those who remembered her became unwell. One teacher tried to burn her house down. He was found fused inside his car seat, every bone twisted backward. No fire ever came close. The house rejected flame. Inside, the children left by the cult had begun to speak, but not with their mouths, with their bones, tapping out rhythms on the floor, whispering through the air vents, singing lullabies with no words. Claire sat among them, her skin glowing faintly beneath her clothes. Each child bore the mark of the god on their chest, an open eye with a mouth instead of a pupil. One of the children, a girl named Annalise, asked Claire why she cried at night. Claire didn't answer, because she didn't remember what crying was. The mask fed on fear, but it was starving for recognition. And the time had come. The house swelled. Rooms doubled in size overnight. The front door now opened into endless halls of blood-red wallpaper and flickering lights. There was no more outside. Those who tried to leave returned through the attic. Every escape attempt led back to her. Then came the night of the hollow sound. All lights in the town died at once. Everyone heard it, a low vibration, like a moan stretched over centuries. Glass shattered. Dogs barked until their throats collapsed. Children wept without understanding why. In Claire's house, the basement door opened by itself. The god was ready to speak. Claire stood before the cradle. The walls of the house bent around her. She held the mask in her hands, and she whispered, "What are you?" It answered through every pipe, every crack, every hairline fracture in the walls. "I am the thing that watched you pretend to be alive. I am the silence between your heartbeats. And now I want your voice." She placed the mask over her face, and her body convulsed. Her veins blackened, her ribs cracked outward like wings, and she began to laugh and sob at once, because she remembered everything. She was not just Claire. She had always been the voice, long before she was born, long before her mother named her, long before her body grew into a woman. The god had lived in her bloodline, waiting for someone strong enough to wear its mouth. She was the vessel, and now it had ripened. The final chapter of the outline ends as Claire speaks aloud, her voice layered with 1,000 others. Man, woman, child, animal, child, and things without names. The floor cracks open, the house breathes in, and the town begins to forget it ever existed. Claire no longer walked through the house, she drifted. Her feet did not touch the floor, and her shadow no longer obeyed gravity. It stretched upward, clinging to the ceiling like a silent, watching creature. The children followed her, their bare feet silent, their mouths stitched shut with red thread. They didn't cry, they didn't laugh. They just watched and waited, because something beneath the house had opened. Not a room, a womb, and something inside was ready to be born. The walls bled freely now, not metaphor, not hallucination. Blood. Thick. Warm. Alive. The ceilings cracked, and instead of plaster, long strands of sinew pulsed through the beams like tendons holding the house's skeletal frame together. The kitchen sink ran black bile. The windows showed places no longer connected to earth, a red ocean with no horizon, a forest of flesh, a sky made of screaming faces. Outside, the town was missing. Where once stood a neighborhood, now there was only fog, and shapes in the fog, shapes that watched, shapes that knocked, but did not have hands. The final ritual was not fire. It was silence. Claire stood in the basement. Her face was gone beneath the mask. Her voice, layered with centuries of inhuman tongues, spoke without speaking. Around her, the children formed a perfect circle. They kneeled, their heads tilted back, their spines arched until the sound of vertebrae popping echoed like fireworks. One by one, they sang with their bones, not music, not words, just a sound that made reality bend. The floor split open, not a crack, a birth canal, and out came it, not a god in form, not a demon in flame, but a mouth as big as the room, lined with teeth that looked like fingernails and broken glass. A tongue made of twitching eyes, breath that smelled like the moment before death. The god did not speak. It swallowed the air, the light, the last echoes of the real world. Claire did not flinch. She stepped forward and laid her hand on the tongue, and the house screamed. The transformation was not violent. It was inevitable, like a heart giving out, like a world forgetting itself. The house reversed itself. Walls folded inward, rooms shrunk and vanished. Staircases snapped into themselves like broken ribs. Windows blinked shut. and when it was done, where the house once stood, there was a hole. Not a crater, not rubble, a perfect circle of absence, as if the earth had decided this space never belonged to it. Weeks later, hikers would come close and never remember why they turned back. Birds would fly over and forget to sing. For days, in satellite images, the patch of land showed static. If zoomed in close enough, a shape could be seen at the center, a woman, or what once was. Her limbs, too, long, her hair moving without wind, her face still covered in the mask, and her eyes looked back through the screen. The final moment belongs to a voice, not Claire's, not the gods, but something between, a whisper from the hole. You begged for silence, now choke on it.